Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Two World Podcast. I have the honor of getting us started today, and I am Barney, and I'm here with my co-host, and he is
Jacob.
And today we are very, very honored to have with us a special guest on our show. She is a best-selling and award-winning author of over 30 books that range from novels to children's books to nonfiction. And we are so pleased to welcome to the show Suzanne Woods Fisher.
Thanks for having me today. I appreciate it very much.
It is truly an honor, and I'm trying to get my nerves to calm down here a little bit. Yeah. If I can just introduce for everyone how it is that how we arrived here at this point of having her on the show today is when my mom has read, when she was living, read a wide range of books, and it wasn't too long before she kept saying to me, "You have to read this Suzanne Woods Fisher. Oh, I just finished another Suzanne Woods Fisher book, and oh, you just have to read it." And I don't know why. I just kept thinking to myself, oh, maybe, it was like kind of a family joke for us that, oh, there goes mom, reading another Amish fiction.
Yeah, exactly. I totally get
that. And then after, my mother passed away in 2003 or 2023. And I happened to pull up her reading history through the reading app, and then I thought, you know what, I really am going to read these books, and I started with one of the Stony Ridge series. I think it was The Letter, or The Keeper. It was The Keeper, and I got to do it in order, and I thought, oh, this is amazing. Just the small town, the characters, the settings, and especially just the message that you get from within. You really learn a lot about yourself and from what the characters are going through. I was so touched by the book, so much so that it wasn't long before I thought, looking up on my phone, where is Stony Ridge? And can I go to the Sweet Tooth Bakery? And only to find out that no, it's located somewhere mysteriously within Lancaster County, Pennsylvania, but no one is quite sure where.
Which is for a reason, because
yes,
people get mad at you if you write about their town.
Wouldn't be surprised. Yeah. So, again, we're so glad to have the chance to sit down and talk together. And we're just, one nice thing about our composition today is that in that time, I've read through all of your books except for the Cape Cod Creamery and the ones dealing with the florists. But Jacob, on the other hand, is very, very new to your writing. So I feel that we'll have a really interesting way to play off one another and probably have a really enjoyable time together, I hope. But starting off, we looked on your website and we saw how you wrote how curiosity is so important, how throughout all your life you've been very curious. And thinking in terms of writing books, how is it that you can gauge whether or not your personal curiosity can become a book? And then how is it that, probably being so curious, how is it that curiosity in your life of faith also plays a role? I think that would be just kind of so interesting to hear.
Well, first of all, I'm so curious that we've got a man in Ohio who does not know about Amish fiction. Tokyo, who's read.
Who is very
ironic. But I think most writers are probably overblessed with curiosity. I think that's probably what drives them and compels them to be sort of poking their nose in people's business. And, some of learning just where you mentioned, how does it drive books, or how does it develop?
Mm-hmm.
How does something curious? One thing I just really want to point out is that it is a business writing novels.
Mm-hmm.
And as much as there are probably so many more topics I would love to explore, but there isn't an audience for it. And I do pose a lot of ideas to my editor and she slams them down. So there's I feel a great respect for the fact that it really is an industry. And I think I always try to encourage other aspiring writers to be aware of that, because there are many books still to be written, good ones, but their audience might be for a family. They might be really narrow. But when you're trying to become a published author, you need to be aware of your audience, of what the market is asking for, and on and on. So to me, it's sort of it's a joint partnership with my publishing house. The covers, the promotion, the marketing, that's about 50% of the whole process is really, writing the book is one thing, but the other half of it is the business side of it. But back to curiosity, I do think that and this is where I feel my faith. I always feel I like the impression of a tea bag infused in hot water. I just feel faith changes everything. And so as I come across something of interest, I'll follow it up and follow it up and follow it up. And I kind of feel that's the Lord, it's the Holy Spirit just sort of whispering to pick this up and see where it can go. And we're going to talk later, I think, about a book that I feel probably illustrates that best, called Mending Fences. That is probably my most significantly, stake in the ground kind of a book when it comes to how faith changes the way you look at life.
Wow, I really like what you're sharing there. And I kind of want to ask a little bit about how writing for you can be connected with your sense of calling. I'm really hearing a lot about how your faith is shaping your understanding of your work. And do you see writing as a calling? And if you were going to describe that to somebody else, how would you explain that?
I love that question, because it's almost as if I was telling someone else in another interview, think of almost a musician that even if they weren't paid, they just have to play, even if it's on the street corner. I mean, that is a passion. And it's a poor passion. I mean, it's like, it is not anything I would encourage anyone to go into. I think writing has to be something that you just have to write. You have to find the way to express yourself through the written word. But that doesn't mean it's the only passion. I mean, I think God has given so many of us different callings, and I hope everybody finds a calling. And it doesn't have to be anything that seems applauded in the world's eyes. I think sometimes even gardening is just one of the loveliest callings we can have, and making the world a better place, So, but I do feel when you are trying to be an aspiring author, that is really something you have to get clear about, because it's so discouraging. It's such, when you send a proposal in, and there are a lot of work to put a proposal, 3 chapters, a synopsis, your market analysis. They are not even trying to see whether you fit in. They're trying to see why you don't fit in. It's really a world that is trying to weed out anything that isn't going. This is back to the concept of this is a business. So you have to be so clear that you're going to pick yourself up and keep going and try again and learn and adjust and really develop a resilience. And then once you are published, it's kind of like you're standing in front of the world in your underwear. I mean, your imagination is so exposed, and critics, all kinds of reviews come in. So once again, if you don't get clear on why you write and what this is all about, I think you could really, really fall apart pretty fast. And that's just part of the sort of the, it's not a hard shell, but it's definitely understanding that, Lord, this is between you and me, and I'm going to do the best I can with what I can. And sometimes I go back to that parable about the 3, the 1 talent, the 3 talents, the 5 talents. And I don't mean this in a fake modest way. I feel very much like a 1 talent author. I feel like I work really hard with what I have. And I just feel so thankful that God has given that. It is so easy to start looking at the 3 talents and the 5 talents and start thinking, oh, but, or why not? And it's like, recalibrate, reboot, get back to what this is all about, which is I try to write to answer that call God has put on my life.
Mm.
Your early time writing started more along freelancing, writing for magazines, and you even spent time, I believe, writing in Hong Kong while you were in living in Hong Kong. Did you have the sense that, especially at that time, I believe you had younger children. Did you have the sense that maybe this was fulfilling enough? And how did you realize that from there you wanted or needed more, and that would take the shape of being a novelist?
Well, I like that question because I'm on the other side of being middle-aged now. So there's a little more, I actually love it for so many reasons, though it would be fun to be 20 again. But it is, you do have a different view of life when you've got some decades that you're working with. And when I look back on my 20s, my 30s, my 40s, I had that call to write and loved to write, even as a child, loved to write. And I did a lot of magazine writing. And that was, this was a time when there were lots of magazines. That was, periodicals were a big deal. And I feel so thankful for that time because I was raising children at the time. I'm married to a very busy corporate guy. So for us, it was best that I was home with the kids, 4 kids. Great grit for the oyster with 4 kids. And I could kind of work out a lot of parenting issues as I was through writing. Like I could interview experts and get, points of view. And it really worked well. But it was a balance of definitely, of family and writing. So it wasn't the main thing in my life. The main thing in my life was really my family. I would say that looking back now, I see that time was such a gift because the skills I developed as a nonfiction writer, research, cold calls, having the boldness to just go after something, pursue an expert, that all played in later. And I'll get to that in a minute. But those were really critical years. And then we moved to Hong Kong. We were transferred overseas. And this was right as the internet was beginning to bloom. So I had the opportunity to just continue those relationships with editors. And these are magazines like Christian Parenting Today, Marriage Partnership. There was Christian Retailing. There was a lot of different magazines, mostly family related, not entirely, but mostly. So we repatriated after 4 years away. And now my children are starting to head off to college one by one. And this is where I had space in my life. And I look back now, and this is why I started the idea of writing a novel, something I had never thought of. I've always seen myself as a nonfiction writer. And I didn't have a full story in my head. I didn't know what to begin with. I wasn't like one of those people that is just like constantly telling your children imaginative stories. But my niece gave me this book called If You Want to Write by Brenda Ullin, published in 1938. And she was in college and she sent it to me because she loved the book. And there was this quote in it, like something like, I need to memorize it, but basically like everybody has something interesting to say. And it was kind of a feeling like, who's stopping me from trying to expand my horizon? Me, just me. So this is a true story. I had this little idea for a World War II novel starring Dietrich Hanover, of people. And I just quietly wrote and wrote and wrote. Didn't know what I was doing. And now I'm so glad I just didn't let that stop me because it was just such an exercise of joy and pleasure and fun. And I had no expectations. I didn't tell my husband. I didn't tell my sister, my children. And at the end of about 4 months, I had a first draft. And first drafts are really drafty drafts. I mean, they're really, really bad. But I was at the dinner table and I said, I have an announcement to make. I have written a book. And my youngest son looked up and said, that's why there's no food in this house. And he was absolutely right. For 4 months, Life had just whittled down to the basics. I'm not even a big shopper, but our credit card was almost zero. It was just like, that was all I was doing was working on this novel. But from that, even with all the context I had, I got rejection after rejection after rejection, and finally decided I had an acceptance by a small royalty press, and I went with them because I thought, why not? Look, let's just get started and see. And that opened the door. I love the small pond concept because it was easier to get awards in the small pond. It was easier to get, some recognition. I learned so much about like going to bookstores and asking if I could sell the book on commission, about talking to groups, about finding anything nonfiction I could pull out of that book to try to connect and market. And from that, an agent caught the attention of an agent. I did numerous refusals by agents, by the way. And one agent, said, we had a long conversation. She found out my grandfather was raised plain. It was right as the older Amish were catching the attention with Amish fiction for a number of reasons. Connected me to a Revell editor. And from that is now actually over 40 books later. Same editor, same publishing house. And that's an unusual story. But I feel, kind of to circle back to your original question, I am so thankful this came at a time in my life when I was not raising little ones, because I go to award ceremonies and I see these darling young women who will get up and they're so talented and they get an award and they're thanking their husband and their mother-in-law and their mother for watching their children so they could write. And all I can think is, oh, you're never going to get that time back. Never with babies, but you will get it for writing. There is going to be time. So that's a very long answer to your to a quick question about timing of life. But to circle a little bit to what I mentioned about nonfiction versus fiction, I look back at that as well. And I think all those nonfiction skills I try to bring into my fiction writing and make it more credible, but then flip that around. And I think my fiction writing that I'm continually trying to improve has jazzed up my nonfiction writing and given it much more flavor. So I always encourage aspiring writers to not box themselves up. Try both.
I read a historical fiction author once, and she said that she spends more time researching the book than writing the book. But the end result, thinking about the series you wrote in Nantucket, and then the Anna's Crossing of the Amish going to America, and you can really get a sense of all of the research that you put into it, and then your notes at the end about how things you may have switched and how the book possibly could have been different if you focused on how truly hard the sea voyage was from Europe to America. But then I just have to share this because I loved the note you put where we get a sense of the type of author you are in your imagination, where you said to your family, don't bother me right now. I've got an Indian battle going on in my head. And I think my life and Jacob's life, we have a pretty structured routine, but the life of an author must really be, there must be time where you're very focused on your task, and maybe time where you're having a little bit more, a little bit more of a peace, or a little bit calm, in your routine. But how do you keep your self-centered and focused when you're feeling the pressure of a deadline, or when you're just, the creative juices are just really flowing, and to make kind of a structure within your day, but still be creative and get the story told that you want to tell as it's coming to you?
Well, deadlines help. They help a lot. Keep that motor moving forward. But I tend to be a really disciplined writer, and I have a word count every day. And usually before a manuscript is due, I will have at least marked out through the calendar where I want to be month by month. It gives me a little bit of structure and peace of mind of just knowing I'm marching along. Not every hour is billable. Not every day is great writing, but it kind of advances the plot along. Now, then we come to the month before a manuscript is due. And that here I am 40 books later and I'm still learning. That's just a tough month because I need to go so deep into that book where I'm going through it now a number of times. And in each pass, I need to remember details that happened in a chapter before. I'm putting together a timeline to catch mistakes. And when you get interrupted or you have house guests who don't understand what it's like to work in the house, and that even if it's a laundry room, it's still where I work, and we don't just stop and talk all morning and that kind of thing. I probably just scared off all our house guests, but it is hard. It's like the best of all worlds and the worst of all worlds in a way, because you can jump up and go down and get back, but it is your office. And so that last month, I feel very preoccupied. I feel like I'm just not much company. I'm not much fun. And then you pass it in and you're just waiting. It's that waiting for your editor to get back to you. I don't think editors understand what that time is like. You can't really move forward yet because I still need to keep all those details fresh. But when you get that pass, like a week or 2 weeks ago, I guess I turned in a manuscript, and my editor usually takes a rather long time to get back to me. This time she was pretty brief, and she even gave a quick middle of the read thumbs up, which was unusual, but very hopeful. And then I ended up with revisions that took me probably 30 minutes, not long at all. And then comes this wonderful sense of peace. Like you've just run a long race and you can kind of really catch up and go get a great meal and not exercise again for, it's really kind of a marathon. But I do believe in the structure of discipline with writing. Like you can't just sort of wait till the mood strikes you. You have to get yourself in your chair and work and just see it, not so much like writer's block, but you're just going to kind of keep going and going. And this is kind of a side story, but when I'm talking at a conference, there's this story about the two explorers that got to the South Pole, and one took the Norwegian, I think, took this very, 15 miles a day. Even if the weather is horrible, we're going to stop, or even if it's great, we're going to stop. He was just 15 miles a day. And the other one, I think it was the Englishman, Scott, he let the conditions drive them. And if it was a great day, they advanced as far as they could. And if it was a stormy day, they would stop and just tend to their repairs. That sounds so logical. But the Norwegians group made it there and back, and the Scots group died, and it just, there's something about just that continued, I don't know, just marching toward the goal that I think is the better path as a whole. It gets you to the deadline.
As you're talking there about discipline and the challenges of writing, and it makes me wonder about the emotional experience of when you've invested a lot into a particular idea and a story, or you've gone down a certain pathway and then maybe get feedback from an editor that this change needs to take place or that change needs to take place, how that could maybe be painful or hard to let certain details go. And I'm wondering, how do you advise people who are younger who maybe feel almost hurt or disappointed, or that they're letting parts of the story go, to keep focus on the picture? Is there an element of, reckoning one does with one's own ego, or how do you get into the headspace where you're like, I'm going to let that piece go, even though I think it has potential that somebody else didn't see. I'm going to let it go to move forward. I don't know if that is relevant, but it just came to mind as you were talking there.
Yeah, the cutting floor.
That's well said, Jen.
I think that for me, there's a lot of humility that comes, and I believe in the editing process. I think editors need editors. I mean, we all need an editor you could take it to a spiritual level. We all need filters. We all need, we all need continual sanctification. And so when I turn in a manuscript, honestly, I'm so pleased with what my editor sees. I make a point of not bringing up the areas that concern me to her, because a lot of times, most times, that's not an issue. She sees it in a fresh way or a different way. And she'll see other things. For example, probably one issue I have on a little bit of a recurring basis is I'll have one character that might be a little too mean. And so my editors tend to really want a character to be likable, even if they're a little bit hard to enjoy. And that's challenging. That's not that easy to kind of create a endearing, unpleasant person. So I have to admit there are probably moments when I think, oh, I think we could do more here, but I respect that we got to keep moving this along. And if they see it that way, I appreciate it. So there haven't been a lot of times that we've been at an impasse. I remember there was one author who sent in a manuscript, and she's a great author. So maybe she can say this from her vantage point, but she made a comment on Facebook, like, I'm sending it to my editor and I really don't want to hear anything but it's perfect. And I just thought, oh, I really don't feel that way when I turn a manuscript in. I really look like I'm so eager to see what this wise editor can do to bring out the best. Now, the cutting floor, sometimes I think those are opportunities for promotion. You can always have the lost chapter or the chapter that didn't make it. It could possibly be material you use. I have a whole files of extra material. I cut a lot myself. Another thing I make a mistake in is I get a little too textbooky. I get so excited by details to sound really legit, as a researcher, that my editor will say, wow, we're bogging down. We got to tighten this up and clean it up. And that is hard to pull out facts that I think, but you can use it. So everything is kind of usable.
Speaking of characters that might be hard for everyone to really enjoy reading, you probably know that I'm headed toward Luke Schrock here. For a number of books, I thought, this character, please, could you leave everyone alone, please?
Yeah.
But I wondered if his inception and this getting to, hopefully we can talk about other characters, but I wondered if, he first shows up in a series that focuses on his mom and a really difficult time that she had reinventing herself later in life. And I wondered if it was just him and Samuel as his brother, as just, here are kids that she happens to have right now. And then when did you decide that he would become this character? And then, as you mentioned earlier in Mending Fences, that he would be, the main character and have such a really deep and rich story in that book. And I have to be honest that I kind of put off that book for the longest time because I didn't really want to read more about him. But then I was very, very glad that I did, to see, wow, the way that he turned himself around. And then now how he still shows up in some of your later books that focus on Stony Ridge, and how you can really sense how he has grown. And so I'm curious about his development. And then also, are there parts of your life or the lives of those around you that you've kind of woven into maybe his character, or experiences that maybe helped shape who he was, or maybe other characters as well?
Well, we first meet Luke Schrock, I think, in the letters, where he's a young boy and you start to see just that he's had some trauma in his life. And then we carry on in the Bishop's family, where you see him now as a late teen, early 20s train wreck. And then moving into, so the last book, The Devoted, he is carted off to rehab. So just to give readers an idea of where he is. So then then there's the redemption of Luke Schrock in my Mending Fences. But to go back to Luke, well, two things. One, he's sort of a believable character when you think of
Oh, yeah.
kids growing up and they have dealt with, you know, a blended family, a lot of a death, just too much, and maybe have felt overlooked, misunderstood, or lacking the father figure that they need. And you see these kids in their late 20s. I certainly have seen a lot of my friends' children's who like get into college and they really, this is their first time on their own, and they are really struggling. Even, I think this isn't Luke's situation, but I think a lot of mental illness starts exhibiting in those times of great stress, late teens, early 20s. So Luke then, as we move into Mending Fences, and this is a story that is really on. So I really want to always go back to what makes this story uniquely plain. Why is it different from just another book? And I think what I came up with was that the community did not reject Luke. He was welcomed back in, but with a lot of guardrails. And one of the things that the bishop, and I'd love to talk about this bishop later on, but he has Luke almost go through 12 steps where he is going to every person he hurt and facing what he did and apologizing and then making amends, which is a lot of what the book's about, and how that changes him as he understands the damage he caused. I didn't expect this, but that book it's really been one of the grittiest, for Amish fiction.
Mm-hmm.
And even my editors were very, very touched in reading it. I had notes of tears. I've had people talk about taking that concept of going to someone and, really making amends, not just this apology, but truly trying to fix the wrong. And I didn't realize that. I guess maybe that's good. Maybe this is where the Holy Spirit can work and take the idea. But it's one book I'm probably most pleased with in that it most represents what I'm trying to show. Maybe Anna's Crossing would be another when I write about the Amish of the fiction books, where Anna's Crossing is a story about the very first Amish that came from the old world to the new world on these rickety old merchant ships. This was before there were passenger ships. And what made them different of them? How do you know they were plain when you take away the bonnets and the buggies and the horses, everything that are markers that let you know you're in another world? I had to figure it out on a ship. And that was really challenging, but it was really, really fun to try to really strip away everything and see, why are you different from the rest of us?
Yeah, and I'm sorry. I think that when you explained it that way, because I could never quite put my finger on why is it that when I read your books, I really get the sense that the characters are Amish, but it's not blatantly so. Not everything is they took off their bonnet, or they're using they're using the kerosene lamp, or they're driving a buggy. It's just there's this inherent message that gets through that these characters are experiencing all of the same things that us as normal, in the normal everyday life experience, but they're experiencing it differently. And just, that's how you get it. That's how you realize, oh, this is why they're Amish. This is how they're Amish, how they deal with these. And, in the case of Anna's Crossing, when there was the slave ship and they said, we're out of water, and they gave up their water. They gave up their water, and everyone told them not to do it, but they gave up, and they trusted that their water would be replenished eventually. And then in Luke's case, he, I just thought it was so inspiring how he goes to each person and apologizes, but then he also says, the bishop and the deacon expressly told him he has to ask, how did what he did affect the person? And I learned a lot from that as well. And in addition to Burns 10 steps for, 10 rules for wayward boys, trying to apply that to, as I can with my kids. You make a mess, you clean up the mess. But that was meant so much to me, thinking about what am I doing? How does it affect other people? And then asking them if I can, humbling myself, being brave to ask them, what is it that I did? How did that impact you? And then trying to go forward from there.
So hard to do.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, I can think of a number of examples as you're talking. I'm like, I could probably do a little better on this. This is, our natural thing is avoidance. Just cut people off, move on. And yet the awareness that God is bringing of how we work in community, I mean, it is powerful and life-changing. Thank you for those insights. I really appreciate it.
I just have a very general question about terminology. I think a lot of our listeners and viewers probably know this already, but it might be helpful for those that don't. But you've used the term several times, plain or plain community. And I'm just wondering if we could just explain a little bit more for our viewers and listeners what is meant by that.
The word plain, and I would capitalize the P, is a word that the Amish and the Mennonites and the German Baptists and the Apostolic and the River Brethren and the Hutterites, this large group of Anabaptists, that's the term they would use more for themselves. And it comes, just to give you a really brief history lesson, but I love this kind of stuff. But, it comes out of right after the Reformation, when a actually formerly Catholic priest, really named Menno Simons, strongly believed that adult baptism was the way to go. That was what the scriptures informed him. And that seems like such a small thing in our day and age. And yet it was civil anarchy. And when you think about it, follow the money. This was how the Catholic Church, this is how the government all taxed people, was those records. And so these Anabaptists, people who were, baptized again as adults, were just chased across Europe. And they grew and grew and grew. But instantly come divisions, just like any church group. The first were the Mennonites, Menno Simons. That's where really it began. The Hutterites came next, and then just split and split and split. And the Amish were actually last to the party. They were late 1800s with I believe it was a deacon, it might have been a bishop, Jakob Amann, and he was a tailor in Switzerland, and he sounds like a tough man. And he did not believe that the Mennonites went firmly enough into church discipline. So he introduced the idea of shunning, where you're literally ousted from the community until you repent. Well, that's what we sort of know. We think of all these groups as sort of shunning, and that's not true. It's just the Amish. My grandfather was German Baptist, also known as Dunkards. And he actually left and went to college. The Mennonites have a lot of higher education. The Amish do not. But there was not any shunning. He had a very close relationship he had 11. He was one of 11. Lots and lots of relatives who call themselves plain, and they wear plain clothing, not quite as plain as the Amish, but they have the bonnets and they have, very distinctive clothing. They will drive in cars and use electricity in their home, but no computers, no radios. And there's so many people. The Amish are the most distinctive. They're the ones we know of. They're the ones, believe it or not, the fastest growing population in North America. Not the largest, but the fastest growing. By 2050, they're projected to have over 1 million older Amish. In 1900, there were about 5,000. And they assumed that at that time, they'd assimilate into the culture like so many other groups did, but they have maintained, and this is what I find so fascinating. Here we are, 2024, almost 2025, and they are still so distinctive, so growing, moving into new areas, holding tight to so many traditions that are dear to them. And yet they're part of our world. They're part of America. They're, I think they're just fascinating people. They're always surprising me, and kind of endless opportunities to write about them. I think because of my grandfather, I like to honor them, not make them perfect, not make them one size fits all at all, because they're not. but I think they have a lot to teach us. And I'm not saying that we don't, I'm not saying they have everything right. I don't even think I could be Amish. I could probably be Mennonite, but I just look at, of how they take their sense of the sovereignty of God into all areas. And I think it just brings them such peace and contentment. And you see it in statistics. They have lower depression rates, lower alcoholism, lower, obviously divorce is not, I'm sure they have lots of unpleasant marriages, but zero divorce rate. They have really things to back up that there's something right about how they view the world. So there's your history lesson about that.
That was great. Thank you. And if I may, just to translate a little bit too, the term plain seems like it could point to their intuition to be set apart or separate from the rhythm and the bustle and the value system of the world. And I'm sensing maybe it's this commitment to live simply. The plain idea is that we're not going to be caught up in any type of speedy routine or value system that will distract us from the core essentials. That's my own kind of layer to the discussion. Is like there was this commitment, my understanding too, of the early Anabaptists to living simply, and that is an expression of being separate from the broader world. But that makes your addressing of the Amish community so interesting in your novels. Can you speak a little bit about how those intuitions and desires get misunderstood? Because one person's desire to be set apart and live simply could be another person's form of exclusion, or like, oh, look, they think they're better than us, or which is, I think, definitely a misunderstanding of what's going on. But how do you address like cultural misunderstandings around the plain community or other communities that you write about? Is that a goal sometimes when you're writing to help pull back the veil a little bit to your audience? Or
Well, so tell me, what do you mean exactly as far as exclusion? So, for example, I think there's different groups within the old order Amish. So you have from what they would call progressive all the way to extreme conservative, and they're highly isolated and very little contact with the outside world. The progressives, and I'm talking old order Amish, I'm not talking new order, they would be much more open to interacting and voting and things like that. So I don't know if that's what you mean as much, or are you talking about pride? Are you talking about?
Yes, about perception of like the motivation that drives the behavior. Like, could an outsider see this community as insular and wanting to circle the wagons and looking judgmentally at the broader world? Oh, you think that you're better than us because of your lifestyle, or in which I'm sure in some cases one could feel that way, but it feels like the way that you've told the story about the plain community, a lot of this lifestyle emerges out of their commitment to living simply, and this theology of supporting one another. And it's deeper than just, it's not rooted in, we're better than the world, and it can just decay on its own, but it's rooted in the sense of like we have this calling. But that's my own way of narrating it. So I wanted to see, what is your take? Like, when have you encountered that where others have misunderstood the plain community and thought, they're insular and they want to circle up the wagons, they want to be this set apart people and they don't care about the broader world? Or have you kind of deconstructed that a little in your work? Do you think you've presented it differently? I would just love to.
No, you've got a bunch of different directions I can go there, but I think one of the things that really makes them distinctive is that they are raised with a group mentality. So what's best for being Amish for your church, and each church is a standalone, but they share many cardinal values, but that is what's best that's what you do. So if that church needs a buggy repairman and you have a desire to open a bakery, you're going to be a buggy repair person. I mean, that is a very different from our way of thinking. When we were talking about my passion for writing, that is, you and I, the three of us, being an individual is so much a part of who we are as Americans. You almost can't you almost don't even realize how much it affects us. And they just have been raised, shaped right from the start. Babies are conformed a little bit. So you could kind of argue, I mean, let's take education. We value higher education. It is really, I mean, aren't you impressed if anyone goes to one of these Ivy Leagues? Aren't you automatically like elevate who they are in your mind? And that is just not the way they think. However, just because the education ends at 8th grade doesn't mean their learning ends. They are continually, I think at the best of them, I think some of the brightest people, they're German, frugal, resourceful people who've experienced a lot of martyrdom and hardship in their past. So, for example, I stayed at a home of this one man named Daniel, and he had a dairy farm. And when his oldest was, I think, 20, he passed the dairy farm to his oldest son. And he then hired out as an electrician, though he doesn't use electricity. He was self-taught. And it's like, that's just amazing. But that's kind of the way they think about, they aren't, I guess I don't even know if they would be that concerned about what others are thinking of them as much as there's so many perceptions about and misperceptions about the Amish, especially depending on where you live. But if I could tell people just one thing is it's not one size fits all. They are so varied, even though they are strongly conforming people. I mean, how many babies can sit through a 3.5-hour church service? I can't think of any of my children, 20 minutes max before they'd start throwing Cheerios. But, they right from the start are really taught how to behave, what's expected of you and the rhythms of their life. And then, of course, just a side note, you were born in an Amish family. You make a choice to become Amish when you baptize. So it's not forced upon them. I mean, there's a high expectation and a strong desire, but it is still a choice. So, but I do think I would have to say, like, sometimes, just on a really personal note, often when I meet Amish people, and I know this from all my relatives, they have a bit of an impassive look. I don't know if it's a German, sort of that unanimated a little bit or stern. But I think that could be misconstrued as judging, as prejudice. But I don't believe it's truly there. I don't think that they would meet me and start looking at how short my skirt was, or why am I wearing earrings or anything like that. I think the people I've known have been, very gracious and very, very understanding that that's your life and this is ours.
Thank you. That was wonderful and insightful. I appreciate that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I liked how you stressed that being Amish and remaining Amish is a choice. And I'm curious, how did you decide to create the character of David Stolzfus? Because he always, I think, very wonderfully puts how he doesn't want someone who's half Amish. It was compelled to be Amish, which kind of seems like, if someone's keeping score, you would think you want as many people there in the community as possible, but he wants someone who is making the choice to be fully committed. And is that informed from people that you've met, or is that kind of your hope of like what an Amish bishop, should strive to be? Or how did you shape this bishop? Because probably a lot of people who are getting started reading about Amish or understanding about Amish probably have the impression that it's very strict, very stern, and everyone must be in line. And maybe you can have Rumspringa a little bit, but you better come back. But here in this character, we kind of see it breaks the mold of what a lot of people probably go into books or understand about Amish people, how they are and how they are led. And I'm wondering, how did you come up with the inspiration for this character?
You're absolutely right that there's a stereotype of a very patriarchal bishop who is almost just maniacal, like they're just kind of, I mean, I really, it makes me sad. Now, I'm not saying there aren't bishops like that. I know there are. There's But I have met a number of different bishops, and David is a composite of two whom I met, one of whom had that concept, I don't want people being half Amish. And that means that when it's time for baptism, he does not, he really puts it out there. Like, if you're not wholly here, don't do it. And that doesn't mean leave, but it just like, don't make that commitment when you're not fully ready for it, which I love that. I think that's just a great insight for understanding our whole heart belongs to God, period. You could fill in the words, joining a church or making a commitment to Christ for that idea of making that public confession as an Amish person. So, but there is another Amish bishop who I've gotten to know actually quite well, and he is just one of the brightest people I've ever met and has really influenced my thinking about how I want to represent an Amish bishop. And just to give you an example of how unique this bishop is, his farming practices are so good and healthy. He was one of the first organic dairy farmers in his state, that a delegation from North Korea came to his farm to study farming practices. I mean, wow. And he welcomed them. I mean, I just am still so dazzled. I have been in his home. It's a modest home. He is the kindest. You could be Amish in his church. He is just, he's not progressive. He is, an old order, but he has such a heart as a pastor. Almost the way I picture like Eugene Peterson or one who just a true pastor's heart. So that's why I created this David Stoltzfus. And I love, not all the books include his point of view. Most of the books have him in it. But I love his humility and how often he'll feel like he really blew it, or he'll get criticized by his parishioners and feel really kind of hurt. And you just kind of see a real person here struggling and trying to work things out. And, and he does a good job. Like, I think back to Mending Fences. I think what he did for Luke Schrock in guiding him toward wholeness and health and well-being was really good. I really loved that,
And then even in the Deacon's family, where I think we kind of assume that David was the one who trusted Luke to be a deacon in that series, that of all the people who, who was it who whispered his name, and it makes sense. Yeah, it must have, that this kind of wise bishop, it must have been him.
Well, one of the things that you were saying there that is so interesting to me, I haven't mentioned this yet to you, but I serve as a pastor in a Mennonite community here in Ohio. Yes, is
Mighty
the
Mennonites.
Yeah, it is the heart behind what you're saying there about this character, like this desire for people who can see a need and nurture other people, like the real life example of the person welcoming the guests from North Korea, but like in the fictional world, like somebody that can see a need and help somebody grow. And I guess I wanted to ask a little bit about maybe if you could pull back the veil, like the core themes of the message that you want to portray about faith or about God. In one of our questions we sent to you, we latched on to one of your other interviews where you talked about, yes, you write about tradition, but one of the things that really compels you is the idea of newness and renewal that people experience. And so I guess I'm wondering if you could kind of talk a little bit about, like, what are some of the core parts of the main essential message that you want to convey behind the stories you tell, like spiritually speaking, if that makes sense, what I'm asking.
Oh, I think that's really an important question. And a lot of times I'll get through that first draft, the drafty draft, and I'll think, is there enough God in this? Is God speaking in this? And I will really kind of examine what I have and just look at where could I bring out, without whacking anybody on the head with the Bible, but just where could I always like to invite God into the conversation. And I want a reader to finish the book thinking, there is something more here. There's something real and something I want to find out more about. You mentioned renewal and newness. And I guess I think that God is always at work. He's never done with us. No matter what age or no matter what we've done, there's just always the opportunity for wholeness and goodness to come, so I guess I think it is, it's really something I try to put same song, different verse, but in a different way through every book, that it's not over, no matter what's happened in your life, there's always something God can pull out of his bag of tricks that changes a story, that brings redemption, brings goodness, brings, wholeness and well-being, I guess. And I've seen it. I've seen it in my own life. I've seen it in, the lives of our families. I think there's just that God is at work. I was listening to a Tim Keller sermon the other day, and he talked about something that I think I want to add into an Amish novel because I loved it so much. How we view the justness of God determines how we are able to forgive others. Because if you don't believe God is truly just and loving and just, but that God will handle this, you're going to try to handle it on your own for the rest of your life. And I just thought that is a really Amishy way of looking at the whole idea, a Mennonite-ish way, Anabaptist way. Just like, I can let this go. I don't have to fight this. I don't have to push this in court, the court of law. I can really trust that God will right the wrongs in his time. Really pivotal when you think of how much of look at even the election period, just how much of it is just wanting both sides, wanting revenge, wanting the last word. And it's a very different perspective.
Yeah, I maybe one final point from me, one final question is, I think that probably for us here and maybe a lot of us listening, forgiveness and forgiving others is really so important for who we are. And so this kind of thing comes kind of not necessarily second nature, but comes readily. And a lot of your characters in your books have this as well quickly. In your most recent book, one character said, well, to another character, why, I can't believe you didn't forgive this person 30 years ago, but when I talk to my friends who maybe don't have this sense to readily forgive, they hang on to things and they are surprised when they see, like I'm thinking of a Ted Lasso episode where he forgave, the person who wronged them right away. And I thought, yeah, that's right. My friend was shocked. I thought, oh, should I be shocked about that? But do you get kind of a response from readers, from other people that they were surprised that some of your characters were so forgiving, or surprised that especially in this day and age that you're focusing on forgiveness so much, or is it kind of the other way that they're so thankful that you're focusing on this and trying to make it more of the forefront of a lot of your books?
Well, I think forgiveness is shocking. Like, I'm so glad you mentioned Ted Lasso, Barney, because I bring that up a lot in a comparison of, we are so drawn to that character. And the fact he just startled us all with how he responded in such a gracious way over and over and over. People loved it. So if we, and I'm not talking about the language that because that was a little shocking, but that message just seemed to resonate. That was such a popular series. Why? Because we know there's a better way. There's a better way for us to move forward. I love that the Amish can reveal that. I think that's really one of the fun things to do with the Amish, is to give you a little hint of the Ted Lasso-ish, in that. But as far as, I think forgiveness also makes people so uncomfortable. It's so hard. It is. It's a challenge to let things go. I totally agree with your comment about people who let a lot of things define them for the rest of their life. A lot of hardship. It defines them. It is part of who they are. And you can tell it's not over yet. which is sad. And I don't mean to make it sound easy, but I think it's one of the great gifts God has given us to learn how. And I think the Amish set the example that it's an expectation, that is something we work on, we strive for. It's part of the Lord's Prayer. I mean, it is really critical to mental health and on and on. But as far as do readers write me about it, I would say at times, but I think it's an uncomfortable topic. I think we admire it in others, but to do it ourselves, and I'm speaking to myself here,
Are there any other questions or comments that either of you would like to make before we close our time?
Anything more, Barney?
Oh, I could keep going forever. but for today, for now, I'm okay.
I think probably the only other comment I would add, we don't have to go into this, but just I've written in different genres, some other historical novels and some contemporary fiction. And they have a similar art in that it's a small town and an outsider trying to fit in, which is often true in my Amish novels as well. It's sort of like using an outside character because you can kind of look at them and try to answer the questions that you've been asking today. Like, why do they dress that way? Why do they act that way? And so actually, even though the topics are really different, you can tell I'm the same author in trying to bring that small community feel, which I think even in a big city, we all sort of long to be known and have people who care about you and who look after you and sort of have a safety net. But anyway, just want to put that in there too.
That's wonderful. And Suzanne, we want to thank you so much for coming and being on our podcast today. It has meant so much to hear from you about your experiences and your insights as an author, and also to hear your faith and your witness coming through your work. It's been an inspiration to me. I'm sensing it is to Barney as well. And we hope for our listeners and viewers that you too have heard this message come through, and that you can go away thinking about some of the things that have been shared, and that it can also be an inspiration for you in your life. So until next time, this is Jacob and Barney signing off from the Two World Podcast. Goodbye.